Next on Face the State, the capital city has been the center of protests and demonstrations about race relations, but all have been peaceful. What is the city doing to answer the protesters' concerns? We'll talk with the mayor, Luke Bronin. We continue our look at black-owned businesses on the verge of expansion with haberdasher A.J. Johnson and the owners of a West Hartford dental office, Brian Wilson and his wife, Kareen. Also, back to school. What will college life be like in the age of COVID? The president of the University of St. Joseph, Rona Free, will join us. It's all straight ahead this Sunday, July 5th, 2020.
From Eyewitness News, Connecticut's most watched local political program, this is Face the State.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dennis House. We begin this morning with big changes in policing being proposed in your capital city. One of the ideas is to give the people more power by means of a stronger civilian police review board. Joining us now is the person who proposed that, Hartford Mayor Luke Bronin. Mayor Bronin, good to see you here.
Good to be with you, Dennis. Thanks for having me.
You're always welcome here, and one of these days we'll have you back in here in person. We're doing all of our interviews remotely in this age of COVID. But I want to begin with, many of the demonstrators were calling for a louder voice or more participation in the policing in the capital city. And they're going to get that with this newly revamped or strengthened Police Civilian Review Board. Tell us about that.
Sure. So first of all, I want to say, as you said in the open, that we've seen weeks of protests. All of them have been peaceful. Many of them have been very powerful, and they've led to some really important conversations. I have heard from some who are focused on things like abolishing the police or defunding the police, and I haven't hesitated to say where I disagree. But we are ready and eager to embrace an aggressive reform agenda. And one piece of that agenda is enacting some significant reforms to the Civilian Police Review Board. The city of Hartford has had a Civilian Police Review Board for many years, but it has some weaknesses and some structural deficiencies. So what I put forward are a set of reforms that I think will significantly strengthen its authority, to give it a full-time, permanent investigative and support staff, to give it subpoena power if and when the state allows us that through state law. And maybe most important of all, to make sure that it is more than an advisory board, that its findings carry real weight, both in the police chief's findings about misconduct or potential misconduct, and also to give the board the ability to challenge and potentially override the chief's findings.
I've had some questions from citizens. They want to know, how do they get on this board, or who makes it to the board?
Sure. So the board is composed of 9 members. It is appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the city council, and as is required in the existing ordinance, try to appoint a diversity of viewpoints, make sure that there's a diversity of viewpoints represented, that we've got good diversity when it comes to experience, racial and ethnic diversity, geographic diversity, and independence. Most importantly, is that there are people who are focused on fulfilling this board's mission, which is civilian accountability and oversight of the police department.
We have many issues we want to deal with, including outdoor dining coming up in just a moment. But I want to ask you first about the chief. Chief Thody had a crash in a city car not too long ago. It is being investigated by state police. What do you know right now that we do not?
Sure. I don't know that I know that much that you do not. I think a lot of this has been out there in the public. I think the basic facts are the following, that back on May 31st, which was a Sunday, Chief Thody was on his way in his city vehicle on his way back toward Hartford on a day when there were protests in Hartford and also protests in other cities that escalated in unexpected ways. He was admittedly distracted driving, using his phone, on the phone, conducting city business. He veered off and hit a guardrail and continued on. He reported that incident that day to our chief operating officer, documented the damage that day, and submitted a report. So from my perspective, those basic facts don't give me a lot of cause for concern. As you know, there will be those independent reviews, and I'll await the results of them. But the bottom line is, this was a pretty minor incident. You had a vehicle that swiped the guardrail, pretty minor damage to the city vehicle. As far as I can tell, no damage to a guardrail. And I think Chief Thody, again, was in the midst of conducting business a day when we had massive protests the day before, protests that day, and preparing for protests the day to come.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I want to ask you about fireworks because the city and the suburbs, too, in fact, all over Connecticut, communities are dealing with these loud fireworks that are being done illegally all hours of the night. You've been cracking down on it. But, I noticed the other day I was in a Walmart and a Big Y, and they're selling a lot of these fireworks. Do you think stores should sell them in Connecticut?
I would love for stores not to sell them in Connecticut. What is legal in Connecticut is pretty limited, even though you may see those big displays. It really is limited to sparklers and fountain fireworks. A lot of the big booms you're hearing are coming from illegal fireworks. Unfortunately, those fireworks that are illegal here in Connecticut are legal in states not too far away. I think that's part of the problem. You've also got people who are bringing these fireworks in and selling them. Our police have actually busted and seized some pretty large fireworks shipments that were going to be sold around the city. And that's a part of the enforcement effort. But the other part is to make sure that our officers are able to respond when citizens complain. So we've set up a tip line. It's 860-757-0000. If residents call with specific information about the location that fireworks are going off and it's timely, we'll try to get an officer out there and do the best we can to stop it. We've gotten hundreds and hundreds of calls. And as you know, Dennis, it's a serious issue. It shouldn't be minimized as a quality of life issue. It's dangerous. It's hugely disruptive to people's lives. It's a big problem here. It's also been a big problem around the state and around the country this year for whatever reasons.
The statue of Christopher Columbus has come down, but not too far from there, there's a statue of Israel Putnam, who owned slaves. I realize it's not your purview because I believe that is actually on state property in the city. But do you believe that that statue should come down also?
I will confess I don't know enough history of Israel Putnam. What I do know is that he was a Revolutionary War general who I think was one of the most senior generals at Bunker Hill, and I think for a long time second in command to George Washington. So obviously played an important part in the role of establishing the independence of our nation. And I think there's an important distinction to draw when we talk about a lot of our founders, which is, are we honoring them because of their flaws and their faults, or are we honoring them in spite of their flaws and their faults, but because of the contributions they made to the birth of our nation and to the cause of freedom and liberty, however imperfect their legacy was?
There are some who are questioning the Columbus statue. They say it's just symbolic. Most people didn't even know it even existed in the city. And yet Columbus Boulevard is a street that businesses are owned and attractions and hotels. People drive it all the time. They talk about it all the time. Should that street be renamed?
Look, I don't know. I think, first of all, you're right. I think most people did not know that the statue of Columbus was there. I do think that you could argue there's a difference between a statue that puts an image of a person up on a pedestal to honor that person specifically, and a name of a street that's been on that street for a long time. But what's also important is there's a process for having that conversation. There is a dedication and naming committee. There's opportunity for public input and for petitioning. And we'll obviously consider any of those petitions or comments that come in, and we'll let that process play out.
Very briefly, final question. A lot of people seem to like the outdoor dining changes in downtown Hartford, the wider sidewalks, some of the parking spots being taken out for additional tables. Can that be permanent? We're having a lot of questions about that.
Well, in some places it is permanent already. If you look at a place like Pratt Street, where we have a number of parklets in the parking spaces, and where you have the road closed down at certain times, I'd love to go more towards fully pedestrian on that street. And there may be other places where we can maintain the expanded outdoor dining on sidewalks and other areas. So I think this is a time when we got to look at the changes that are made in this moment and see whether there's some good stuff that we can hang on to. It sure would be nice if we have some good things that come out of the coronavirus that stick around.
Yeah, we all seem to like it. All right, Mayor Luke Bronin, we thank you so much for being with us today, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thanks, Dennis.
In a moment.